Here we keep you entertained by our folk tales and true life stories. Please subscribe to our channel as it means the world to us. Also, please like, share, and comment on this channel for more exclusive contents. Now sit back and relax as we take you through the most wonderful epistle. Nathaniel Cross had just stepped out of a sweaty Atlanta bus, his uniform shirt clinging to his back from the broken AC, his head pounding from a long shift hauling delivery crates for River South Logistics. The city buzzed like a machine, too fast and too loud for someone whose soul had grown tired of concrete and sirens. He ducked into a quiet street to breathe and stumbled upon a quaint little bakery with a chalkboard sign that read, "Bennett's Bliss, real butter, real people." Inside, the aroma of cinnamon, brown sugar, and something oddly nostalgic coaxed his weary spirit. That was where he first saw her, Emily Bennett, behind the counter, flour on her cheeks, her brown curls tied up in a messy bun. Her laugh was melodic, wrapping around the space like a familiar hymn. She wasn't strikingly glamorous, but there was something warm and disarming about her, like a fireplace on a cold day. Emily had grown up in that same neighborhood, a quiet girl who escaped into cookbooks after her mother passed away when she was 12. She inherited the bakery space from her grandmother and had been running it alone with the help of her younger sister, Rachel Bennett, who studied nursing. Emily didn't date often, too much trust had been broken by her alcoholic father's chaos, and she found safety and structure in sugar measurements and oven timers. But the moment Nathaniel walked in, tall, caramel-skinned, with hands calloused from hard labor and eyes filled with exhaustion, something stirred. He asked for one honey-baked scone and ended up staying 2 hours, sipping coffee and listening to her talk about baking dreams and midnight recipes. They connected through pain, through quiet admiration, and by the time he left, he asked if he could return. She only smiled and said, "People who love good bread always find their way back." They did not fall in love overnight. Nathaniel began coming in daily, usually after long hours of lifting warehouse freight. Sometimes he was too tired to talk, and Emily would just slide a warm muffin his way and sit in silence beside him. Slowly, stories trickled, his strained relationship with his mother, his dreams of owning his own transport fleet someday, how he wanted to build something that didn't require a degree to be proud of. Emily, in return, shared her fears of losing the bakery, her struggles with debt, and how Rachel's nursing tuition kept them up at night. One evening, Nathaniel brought his childhood best friend Darren Wu, a charismatic Chinese-American mechanic who immediately hit it off with Rachel. The dynamic grew, two sisters, two best friends, dreams stitched between flour and axle grease. No one noticed that across the street, in a matte black coupe, Vanessa Blackwell was watching Nathaniel walk out of the bakery, her lips curving into a sinister smile. Unbeknownst to them all, the clock on peace had already started ticking. Nathaniel Cross was no stranger to chaos. He had grown up on the south side of Atlanta, the only child of Marilyn Cross, a bitter woman hardened by 2 failed marriages and years of cleaning other people's homes for a living. His father, Jerome, vanished when Nathaniel was 8, leaving only debts and bitter echoes behind. Nathaniel learned not to ask questions. He worked early, mowing lawns and bagging groceries while kids his age rode bikes or played games. At 16, he quit football to pick up night shifts at a local depot. The dream of owning a logistics company wasn't born from fantasy, it came from watching his mother cry over rent notices and from listening to her grumble that no one would ever hand them a seat at any table. Nathaniel swore he'd build his own table, even if it meant losing sleep, skipping meals, or crawling through life with grit between his teeth. Emily Bennett's childhood was no less bruised. Her mother, Julia, had been the heart of their home until cancer stole her away in Emily's 7th grade year. Her father, Douglas Bennett, unraveled after the funeral. Liquor became his language, and anger, his compass. Emily would often shield little Rachel from his outbursts, locking them both in the pantry until silence returned. She found solace in the kitchen, first baking to distract herself, then to survive. She sold banana bread to neighbors and peach pies at school events, gradually saving money to reopen her late grandmother's bakery. By 20, she was more parent than daughter, juggling Rachel's tuition, utility bills, and the weight of grief like spinning plates. Dreams for Emily weren't extravagant, They were quiet things: having a home without yelling, being able to close her eyes without fear, and baking something that made people forget their pain for just one moment. Their early bond had been built on unspoken understanding. Nathaniel once confessed he hated thunderstorms, not for the noise, but because they reminded him of nights his father came home drunk, angry, and unpredictable. Emily, without missing a beat, admitted she used to hide bruises under long sleeves in summer. These weren't conversations they shared with others, but with each other, they made sense. It wasn't just attraction, it was safety. And yet, despite the growing light in their lives, shadows still lingered. Nathaniel's mother, Marilyn, didn't like Emily. "Too soft," she'd mutter. Meanwhile, Rachel worried Emily was giving too much of herself again, especially after years of surviving their father. Neither of them knew that far on the other end of town, Vanessa Blackwell, a girl once obsessed with Nathaniel during their high school years, had returned, and she was no longer just a pretty face with a vindictive streak. She had a plan. It happened on a Thursday evening, beneath the flickering park lights of Crestview Hills, the same park Nathaniel and Emily would walk through after long days, clutching cheap coffee and dreaming of better days. Emily had just finished a double order for a local charity bake sale, flour still smudged across her apron, when Nathaniel called her for fresh air and a walk. She had no idea he'd spent the last 2 months saving for a modest ring, skipping meals, and turning down overtime just to buy it. As they reached their favorite wooden bench by the lake, Nathaniel knelt on one knee, not with fanfare or an audience, but with tears in his eyes and calloused hands shaking. "I can't promise a mansion," he whispered, "but I promise peace. I promise loyalty. I promise to never let you go through this life alone again." And Emily, crying before he even opened the box, said yes. The celebration afterward was intimate and warm, filled with close friends and laughter echoing off the bakery's brick walls. Rachel brought a bottle of sparkling juice and teared up mid-toast. Darren showed up with takeout boxes and a playlist that had everyone dancing awkwardly around kitchen counters. But not everyone at the engagement dinner was smiling genuinely. Lana Porter, Emily's co-worker at the bakery, had been eyeing Nathaniel since the day she saw him lift a flour sack with one hand and wink at Emily. She laughed and smiled, but her eyes followed Nathaniel too closely, and her compliments landed like veiled threats. Still, the moment that truly pierced the celebration came when Vanessa Blackwell appeared uninvited, perfectly made up in an expensive trench coat. She handed Emily a gift, an engraved frame that read, "Don't break what you can't rebuild." Her voice was smooth as honey, but Rachel saw the dagger in her smile. "Nathaniel," Vanessa purred, "you always had a soft spot for lost things." That night, while Emily laid her head on Nathaniel's chest, she whispered, "Do you know her?" He hesitated a moment too long before muttering, "We went to high school together, nothing more." Emily didn't press further, but something in her chest shifted, a fleeting chill that made her hold him tighter. Meanwhile, across town, Vanessa slid back into her apartment, poured herself a glass of wine, and stared at a shoebox filled with old Polaroids, Nathaniel smiling beside her in their teen years, unaware she'd taken some of those pictures secretly. She hadn't just shown up for the engagement, she'd moved back to Atlanta with intent. Nathaniel wasn't just a flame she never got over, he was the man who once rejected her in front of the entire class. And Vanessa Blackwell didn't forget humiliation. She reinvented herself for years to get even. Now, her game had only just begun. The wedding was not the glamorous kind found in glossy magazines or captured by luxury photographers. It was intimate, humble, and breathtaking in its simplicity. Held at the backyard of a community church Emily volunteered at, lanterns hung from trees swayed gently with the evening breeze while guests, many of whom were bakery customers, sat on mismatched chairs arranged by Darren and Rachel. Nathaniel wore a navy blue suit 2 sizes too snug but ironed with care, while Emily walked down the aisle in a second-hand ivory gown passed down from her late grandmother. The air was thick with emotion as Rachel dabbed tears, Darren flashed a proud grin, and soft hymns played on a borrowed speaker. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, trembling as they promised loyalty, kindness, and to always fight for each other, even when it's easier to walk away. There wasn't a dry eye when Nathaniel whispered, "You are my peace in this stormy world." The reception afterward took place inside the bakery, transformed for the night with lavender and burlap centerpieces, handmade by Emily and Rachel. The atmosphere was laughter and warmth, people dancing between cake tiers and coffee cups, with Greg Holt, Nathaniel's colleague from work, raising a toast that had the room roaring with laughter. Greg, a sharp, observant man in his 40s with a salt and pepper beard, had always rooted for Nathaniel and admired his tenacity. That night, he warned him playfully, "Keep that woman close, or someone else might try to." Nathaniel laughed off the remark, unaware of how close that warning would come to truth. Just as the couple prepared to cut their wedding cake, the door creaked open and in walked Vanessa Blackwell, draped in blood-red silk. The crowd fell silent. She clapped slowly, her high heels tapping like a metronome of menace against the bakery floor. "Congratulations, Emily," she said, handing her a sleek black envelope. "Every fairy tale ends. Just don't forget that." And with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she walked out, leaving behind murmurs and raised brows. Emily didn't open the envelope that night. She tucked it into her bedside drawer beside Nathaniel's boutonniere and wedding ribbon. Nathaniel shrugged it off, claiming Vanessa was just dramatic and always had a flair for the theatrical. But something about her presence had left a chill on Emily's skin that even Nathaniel's warmth couldn't soothe. Meanwhile, Vanessa drove off into the night, calling someone whose voice sounded both familiar and distant. "They're married now," she said simply. "Good. Let him get comfortable. I'll take everything from her, then him." The next morning, Mr. Levon Reyes, the CEO of River South Logistics and Nathaniel's boss, called to personally invite Nathaniel to an executive mentorship program, a rare opportunity that could double his income in a year. Excited, Nathaniel didn't notice Emily's unease when he mentioned Vanessa had been the one to recommend him. And in that moment, the foundation of trust, once thick and solid, silently shifted beneath their feet. Emily woke up every day at 4:45 a.m., her apron already hung neatly on the hook by the back door, her fingers instinctively reaching for cinnamon and nutmeg before her eyes were fully open. Since the wedding, business at Bennett's Bliss had grown steadily, thanks to word of mouth and the stunning wedding cake she'd made for her own reception, which had ended up featured on a local food blogger's page. Rachel began helping more often between nursing classes, and soon, the bakery introduced a breakfast menu that drew in morning commuters. Emily, ever humble, smiled at every compliment, but deep down she was proud. She'd come from chaos and turned it into comfort food. Meanwhile, Nathaniel was adjusting to his new mentorship under Mr. Levon Reyes. With Greg's guidance and Vanessa's increasing involvement, he was tasked with overseeing 2 regional delivery routes, an early stepping stone toward becoming branch supervisor. Everything seemed perfect on the surface, but behind the glow, small cracks began to form. Vanessa began visiting the logistics office more frequently under the guise of coordinating new contracts. Her perfume lingered long after she left, and her laughter, a strange mixture of sultry and childish, rang in Nathaniel's ears even after he returned home. She began sending late-night texts, sometimes accidentally, claiming they were meant for Levon or Greg, but her messages grew increasingly suggestive. One evening, Emily spotted a message pop up on Nathaniel's phone from V that read, "Don't forget, you still owe me that favor." When she asked about it, Nathaniel dismissed it, saying Vanessa was just teasing about putting in a good word to Levon. Emily didn't push, but she noticed how her husband now came home later, sometimes after she had fallen asleep beside untouched dinner. Rachel, ever perceptive, warned Emily to stay alert. "Some women don't want your man," she said. "They want your happiness, your peace, your power." And Vanessa reeks of all three. Emily wanted to trust her husband, but something inside her, a memory from her father's betrayals, whispered caution. Then came the day Vanessa walked into the bakery. She arrived unannounced, wearing a crisp white blazer and sunglasses that looked too expensive for her supposed job title. Emily was at the counter, frosting cupcakes, when she heard the chime of the bell and looked up to see the very woman whose name kept hovering like smoke in her marriage. "I was in the area," Vanessa said smoothly, eyeing the shelves. "Thought I'd support your little business." Emily wiped her hands and tried to be gracious, but her guard was high. Vanessa complimented the decor and pastries, but every word felt laced with hidden meanings. "You're lucky," she whispered before leaving. "Nathaniel's the kind of man people dream of." Emily stood frozen long after she left, cupcake knife trembling slightly in her grip. It wasn't the words, it was the look in Vanessa's eyes. A look not of admiration, but possession. And deep in her gut, Emily knew a storm was quietly building. Vanessa Blackwell wasn't just clever, she was calculated, and each move she made was part of a design she had been sketching for years. After the bakery visit, she upped her game subtly but strategically. She began scheduling early morning meetings with Nathaniel under the pretense of logistics briefings, though they never seemed to have paperwork. She would accidentally leave her notebook behind, each time filled with flirtatious doodles or suggestive notes, often including initials like N+C=chaos. One afternoon, Nathaniel came out of a review meeting with Levon, and Vanessa feigned a dizzy spell, tumbling dramatically into his arms. A photographer hired by Vanessa herself, disguised as a street journalist, snapped the moment just in time, and the image later ended up on a local gossip blog, nothing incriminating, just enough to start whispers. Nathaniel, half aware of Vanessa's pull, kept telling himself he was in control. But the lines between harmless and harmful were beginning to blur faster than he could draw new ones. Meanwhile, Emily continued to build her name in the community. A local teachers' union hired her bakery to cater their teacher appreciation event, and her name began circulating at small business expos. She stayed late most nights, frosting cakes while Rachel studied for nursing finals, both of them sharing silence and suspicion. Emily had not forgotten Vanessa's visit, nor the way Nathaniel now guarded his phone more than usual. One evening, she reached for his blazer to toss it in the laundry and found a long, chestnut blonde hair tangled in the lapel. It wasn't hers. She stood frozen, holding it between her fingers, the weight of betrayal heavy even though no words had yet confirmed it. Still, when Nathaniel came home, she smiled. She didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, she slipped the hair into a small paper envelope, labeled it silently, and tucked it behind the bakery's cash register drawer. If Vanessa was playing a long game, Emily would learn to play defense without panic. But her heart had already begun its slow ache, a quiet mourning for a trust she feared was unraveling thread by thread. Across town, Darren Wu started to notice things too. Being Nathaniel's best friend had its perks, he saw things others didn't. Darren often stayed late at the mechanic shop, but he'd catch glimpses of Nathaniel driving past, sometimes with Vanessa in the passenger seat. Once, he tailed them discreetly to a rooftop bar, where Vanessa leaned in too close, her laughter too forced. That same night, Darren brought it up to Nathaniel over drinks. "She's circling you like a vulture," he warned, eyes hard. But Nathaniel brushed it off with a strained smile and said, "Emily trusts me. That's all that matters." Darren left that night unsettled, knowing Nathaniel wasn't as invincible as he pretended. Meanwhile, Vanessa stood in front of her mirror later that night, trying on a necklace she remembered Nathaniel once complimented back in school. "Trust," she whispered mockingly to her reflection. "That's the first thing I'll take from her." The game had officially shifted, and Emily didn't even know the rules had changed. Nathaniel's career was on an upward rocket. With Vanessa's behind-the-scenes influence, he secured an executive role overseeing 3 logistics branches, earning praise from Levon and admiration from his peers. At first, it felt like validation, years of struggle finally yielding fruit. Greg Holt, ever loyal, warned him not to get too comfortable with how quickly things were happening, but Nathaniel brushed it off as jealousy or overprotectiveness. Vanessa, with her impeccable networking, slipped seamlessly into strategy meetings, standing close to Nathaniel, occasionally brushing her fingers along his shoulder as if by accident. Though Nathaniel never publicly acknowledged their closeness, he no longer pushed her away either. Late work nights became the norm, and the once joyful dinners at home turned into apologetic texts that read, "I'm swamped. Don't wait up." And while Emily never said a word, Nathaniel began noticing how quiet the house had become, how even the laughter between Rachel and Darren didn't reach the bedroom anymore. Across town, Emily stood on her own mountaintop, though it felt strangely cold. She'd just won Savannah's Rising Bakers Award, an achievement that came with a modest grant and a feature in the local business journal. Orders doubled almost overnight, and she had to hire 2 part-time assistants, including a bright, young woman named Jada Monroe, who adored Emily like a mentor. Yet, despite the bakery's bloom, her personal life felt frostbitten. Nathaniel hadn't attended the award gala, claiming a last-minute client dinner. The moment her name was announced, Emily's smile faltered. She imagined him walking in with flowers, or at least calling her afterward, but her phone only buzzed once. "Congrats, babe. Proud of you." Short. Hollow. Rachel noticed the shift but didn't push. That night, Emily sat alone in the bakery's back room, her trophy beside a half-eaten slice of strawberry cake. She whispered to herself, "Is this what winning feels like?" She wasn't sure anymore. Meanwhile, Darren had grown increasingly suspicious. During a routine visit to Nathaniel's office, he spotted Vanessa leaning over Nathaniel's desk with what looked like a contract, but Darren could see from his angle, it was a blank sheet. The flirtation wasn't just obvious, it was bold. That same evening, he followed Vanessa to a cafe, where he watched her meet with a man in a black coat who handed her a flash drive and kissed her on the cheek. Something wasn't adding up. Darren approached Greg and shared what he'd seen, and Greg didn't look surprised. "I've been watching her too," he admitted. "She's not just here for Nathaniel. She's playing something bigger." What neither of them knew was that Vanessa had just finalized an internal proposal that would position her as co-director of business partnerships, and she intended to name Nathaniel as her second. All she needed was one final nudge to push Emily entirely out of the picture. Emily stood in the bathroom of the bakery, both hands trembling as she clutched the pregnancy test like a lifeline. 2 pink lines. She stared at them through blurred eyes, her other hand instinctively resting on her abdomen as emotion surged through her, joy, disbelief, fear, and something she couldn't quite name. She'd almost given up on this dream. Months of quiet praying and pretending not to be disappointed had made her bury the desire deep inside. But now it was real. Her first instinct was to call Nathaniel, to hear his voice crack with joy the way she'd always imagined it would. Instead, she paused. It was late afternoon, and he hadn't come home the night before. "Work trip," he had said in a rushed message. No call. No warmth. Still, Emily was determined to surprise him. She began planning a dinner with his favorite meal, the bakery decorated with tiny string lights and baby-themed clues that led to the reveal. Meanwhile, Nathaniel was at Bar Azul, a rooftop lounge downtown, seated across from Vanessa, who claimed she needed a quiet place to decompress. The city lights glimmered below them as she poured wine and spoke about her fabricated childhood traumas, loss, abandonment, loneliness. Nathaniel, exhausted and emotionally frayed, sat there listening, drawn in by the illusion of shared vulnerability. She leaned in closer, her perfume heavy in the air, and whispered, "You're the only person I don't have to pretend with." In that moment, his phone buzzed. He glanced down. It was a missed call from Emily and a photo of a tiny pair of baby shoes on the kitchen counter. He hesitated. Vanessa placed her hand over his and softly said, "She'll understand you're busy. You always put others first, Nathaniel. Maybe it's time you put yourself first." And with that, the final thread of hesitation snapped. Nathaniel slid the phone back into his pocket and nodded. "Just one more hour," he whispered, unaware of what he was leaving behind. Back at the bakery, the candles Emily lit had melted to wax puddles. The food sat untouched, growing cold under the soft amber glow of the lights she'd spent hours stringing by hand. She sat in the middle of it all, dressed in the same blue blouse she wore on their second date, hoping to recreate something sentimental. Time passed slowly. Each creak of the door that didn't come made her chest tighten. Rachel called twice. Emily didn't pick up. When the clock hit midnight, she blew out the candles, wiped her eyes, and quietly packed away the baby shoes, the food, and the hope that tonight would be different. She didn't cry, not then. She just sat on the bakery floor, rubbing her stomach, whispering, "You're still the best thing that's ever happened to me." And across town, Nathaniel laughed at something Vanessa said, unaware that while he shared wine and lies, his wife sat alone celebrating life's most sacred moment, without him. Emily didn't bring up the missed dinner the next morning, not because she'd forgotten, but because she no longer had the strength to chase after accountability. Nathaniel returned home just before sunrise, smelling faintly of wine and hotel linens, claiming his phone died and that an urgent logistics meeting ran over. He kissed her forehead absent-mindedly, never noticing the cleaned-up decorations or the faint scent of burned-out candles. Emily stared at him with a quiet hollowness, her hand resting over her still-hidden belly. She wanted to scream, to shake him and ask why he had changed. But instead, she nodded, said she understood, and turned back to mixing frosting. She told herself maybe it was stress. Maybe it was just a job. But deep down, her soul had started filing away the signs, carving emotional distance out of self-preservation. That morning, when Rachel arrived, she found Emily humming softly while decorating cupcakes, wearing a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Later that week, Rachel stopped by Nathaniel's office to drop off Emily's lunch bag, which she'd forgotten in her car. She hadn't planned to linger, but when she walked in, the sight before her froze her breath. Vanessa was seated on Nathaniel's desk, leaning over and whispering something in his ear while running a polished fingernail along the edge of his clipboard. Nathaniel laughed, completely unaware of Rachel's presence. It wasn't just the closeness, it was the intimacy of comfort. Rachel turned around quietly and left before being seen, her stomach twisted in knots. She didn't confront Nathaniel that day. Instead, she went straight to Emily, placed the lunch bag on the bakery counter, and said, "You need to start watching with your eyes, not your heart." Emily's hand paused mid-frost. "What did you see?" she whispered. Rachel didn't reply. She didn't need to. Silence became the answer Emily feared most. For the first time, the bakery, the place that once felt like sanctuary, felt like a stage for heartbreak slowly unraveling. That night, Emily sat on the edge of their bed, staring at the man she loved, trying to remember when he became a stranger. She finally asked, gently but firmly, "Are you seeing someone else?" Nathaniel frowned as if offended. "Emily, not this again." "You're being paranoid," he said, brushing it off like a joke. She looked into his eyes, desperate to find truth, but all she saw was deflection. "I'm not imagining things," she said. "And I'm not stupid." He scoffed, stood, and grabbed his keys. "I don't have time for these accusations. I'm working late, again." He left before she could reply, the door slamming like a punctuation mark. Emily curled into herself, placing a hand on her stomach. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the baby. "I don't know who your father is becoming." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, a storm brewing not just in the sky, but in the walls of the home they once built together. The days blurred together in a gray monotony as Emily clung to what remained of her routine, trying to outrun the growing ache inside her chest. Her bakery staff noticed the subtle changes, the slight wince when she bent over, her frequent pauses, the sudden blank stares while frosting cakes. But Emily said nothing, determined to carry both her child and her dignity with quiet strength. One afternoon, after Nathaniel once again failed to respond to her call, she went to his office to surprise him with lunch. Instead, she was met by a locked door, muffled laughter, and Vanessa's voice on the other side whispering, "She doesn't deserve you." Emily stood frozen, hand clutching the paper bag, her unborn child fluttering within her like a silent witness. She turned away, numb, but the stairwell felt heavier than usual. Each step home was a march toward a deeper loneliness. That evening, as she sliced strawberries for pie, her vision blurred, and she collapsed onto the cold bakery tiles. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. Rachel rushed in moments after the call came through, her nursing badge still clipped to her scrubs. Emily was lying on the hospital bed, pale and barely conscious, an oxygen tube beneath her nose. The doctor looked grave when he approached. "She suffered a placental abruption, likely stress-induced," he explained. "She's stable now, but we couldn't save the baby." Rachel's knees buckled. She had watched her sister love this child before it even had a heartbeat, watched her sacrifice joy for survival. Nathaniel arrived 45 minutes later, expression unreadable, phone in hand, muttering about being stuck in traffic. He barely looked at Emily before turning to the doctor and asking when she'd be discharged. Rachel stared at him in disbelief. "That was your child," she hissed. "You missed everything." Nathaniel didn't respond. He simply scrolled his phone and asked the nurse for discharge forms. That moment, like a blade, carved itself deep into Emily's soul. Back home, Emily sat silently on the couch, wrapped in a blanket as Rachel packed her things in the bedroom. Nathaniel paced the hallway, visibly agitated. "You embarrassed me," he finally said, his voice sharp. "You just collapsed at work like some damsel, now my boss is asking questions." Rachel stopped folding. "You're serious?" she snapped. "Your wife lost a baby because of your neglect, and all you care about is office gossip?" Nathaniel turned to Emily, face darkening. "You keep dragging my name down. I can't breathe anymore." He stepped forward, raising his hand in frustration, but it wasn't a swing, not fully. Still, the slap came hard, across Emily's cheek, ringing through the apartment like a gunshot in a church. Rachel screamed, pushing him back. But Emily didn't cry. She touched her cheek, slowly stood up, and walked to the door barefoot. "I've lost everything," she whispered. "There's nothing else you can take from me." Then she stepped into the hallway, broken, but finally walking away. Emily moved in with Rachel temporarily, taking up the small guest room in her sister's apartment above the downtown pharmacy. The bakery had to be closed for a week, not because of the physical pain, though her body ached with the echoes of loss, but because her spirit had fractured. Darren dropped by unannounced, bringing her favorite tea and sitting quietly without forcing conversation. He didn't ask for explanations, he just stayed, silently offering her something she hadn't felt in weeks, presence. Meanwhile, Rachel began connecting dots no one else had dared to. She pulled Emily's old phone logs, noticing an alarming number of late-night calls from Vanessa's number to Nathaniel. Then came the tip-off. Greg, concerned by the growing rumors of Emily's emotional instability being whispered through the company halls, reached out to Darren. "Something's not right," Greg said. "Vanessa's saying things. Lies. And people are starting to believe them. She's setting Emily up for something." Behind closed doors at Riversouth Logistics, Vanessa was already 5 steps ahead. She had begun weaving a carefully crafted narrative of Emily being volatile, emotionally unwell, and incapable of supporting Nathaniel's ambitions. Her whispers reached Levon's office subtly, through planted conversations and manipulated emails. She fabricated concerned employee reports claiming Emily once stormed into the workplace, screamed at Vanessa, and broke a glass window, an event that never occurred. Nathaniel, emotionally worn and desperate to maintain his new image, didn't question her. Instead, he leaned into her lies like a man drowning reaching for a float, convincing himself Emily had, in fact, changed. Vanessa even went as far as dropping fake texts into Nathaniel's inbox, messages she'd created to look like they were sent from Emily, filled with venom and threats. "She's not safe," Vanessa murmured in his ear one evening. "She needs help. You're not the villain, Nate. You're the victim here." And slowly, her poison took root. Rachel, however, wasn't fooled. She began collecting evidence, bank statements showing Emily's stability, testimonials from bakery clients, and witness reports from staff members contradicting Vanessa's tales. Darren joined her, helping track down Vanessa's old colleagues from her previous job, one of whom revealed Vanessa had been fired for tampering with internal documents. "She's done this before," the former coworker said. "Manipulation's her art." Greg offered to leak this to Levon but warned they needed something bigger, proof beyond rumors and statements. Rachel took a deep breath and decided it was time for Emily to know everything. That evening, in the kitchen over cups of herbal tea, Rachel laid it all out, the phone logs, the gossip trail, Vanessa's patterns. Emily sat in silence for a long time. Then, without blinking, she whispered, "If she wants a war, I'll show her what survival looks like. But this time, I fight back. And somewhere across town, Vanessa lit a candle, smiled at her reflection, and whispered, "Let the games begin." It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Vanessa showed up unannounced at the bakery. Emily had just reopened after her week of rest, and though her smile returned for customers, her spirit remained guarded. Jada had taken the day off, and Rachel was at school, leaving Emily alone in the shop. When the bell above the door rang, Emily looked up expecting a regular, only to see Vanessa standing there in a sleek gray suit and blood-red lipstick. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside with an expression that dripped with mock sympathy. Emily didn't speak. She simply wiped her hands on her apron and nodded toward a seat. Vanessa ignored it. "You think you're the victim," she sneered. "But you were always in the way." Her words came faster now, venomous, deliberate. "Nathaniel deserves better. He deserves me." Emily stepped back, heart racing. But before she could respond, Vanessa picked up a rolling pin from the counter, and everything shifted. In a blur of motion, Vanessa lunged at Emily, grabbing her by the arm and slamming her against the counter. "I told you," she hissed, "stay out of my way." Emily fought back instinctively, struggling to free herself, but Vanessa was relentless. She struck Emily across the face, knocking her backward into the shelves. Flour exploded into the air like smoke, covering the room in chaos. Emily, dazed, reached for her phone, but Vanessa grabbed it and hurled it into the sink. Then, as if a switch flipped, Vanessa gasped loudly and clawed at her own blouse, ripping the neckline and scraping her own arm with a nearby fork. She screamed, loud, shrill, as if she were the one being attacked. Neighbors outside the bakery stopped. Curious faces peered through the window as Vanessa collapsed to the floor, sobbing, "She hit me. She attacked me." Emily stood frozen, blood dripping from her lip, surrounded by broken glass and betrayal. She knew exactly what had just happened, but had no idea how to prove it. By the time the police arrived, Vanessa had wrapped herself in victimhood like a silk robe. Her cries were convincing, her wounds strategically placed, and her lies delivered with trembling lips. Emily tried to explain, but her words fell flat against Vanessa's performance. "She's unstable," Vanessa sobbed. "She's been threatening me for weeks." The officers, unfamiliar with either woman, took a statement but made no arrests. Vanessa declined to press charges, for now. Instead, she demanded Nathaniel be called, insisting he needed to see for himself what his wife had become. Within the hour, Nathaniel arrived, looking alarmed. He saw Vanessa seated with a bruised arm, torn blouse, and tear-streaked face. Then he looked at Emily, disheveled, scraped, silent, holding her ribs. "What did you do?" he asked coldly. Emily opened her mouth, but her voice cracked. "I didn't," she began. But he turned away. The truth didn't matter. Not when lies were dressed in blood and tears. And that was the moment Vanessa knew she had won this round. The drive home was silent. Emily sat in the passenger seat, her hand pressed gently against her side where the bruises bloomed beneath her sweater, while Nathaniel gripped the wheel with white knuckles and a clenched jaw. She wanted to speak, to explain that Vanessa's tears were a stage prop, that the wounds she displayed were self-inflicted. But when she tried to open her mouth, Nathaniel raised his hand, not to strike, but to silence. "Not now," he growled. "I don't even know who you are anymore." That sentence shattered something permanent in her. When they arrived at the apartment, he stormed inside, grabbed a duffel bag from the closet, and threw it at her feet. "I want you gone by morning," he said flatly. "You've humiliated me enough." Emily stood there, blinking, lips trembling. "You're throwing me out," she whispered. "After everything?" He didn't answer. He just turned away. And for the first time, she knew he had chosen sides. Rachel arrived later that night to help Emily pack. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks as she folded Emily's clothes into a suitcase, each item carrying memories of a love now poisoned by manipulation. Emily didn't cry. She sat at the edge of the bed, too numb for emotion, her hand resting protectively over the ache in her side. "He believed her," she finally said. "He didn't even ask for my side." He just let me go. Rachel bit her lip. Then he was never yours to begin with. In the living room, Vanessa sat comfortably on the couch, sipping tea from Emily's favorite mug as though the home already belonged to her. I'm glad you're doing the right thing, Nate, she purred, resting a hand on Nathaniel's shoulder. You deserve peace. Rachel couldn't resist. As they walked out, she turned and faced Vanessa. Enjoy the crown you stole, she said. Just remember, it's made of glass. And karma's got a hammer. That night, Emily didn't sleep. She sat at Rachel's apartment window, staring out at the glowing city lights that once symbolized dreams, now dimmed by betrayal. She replayed every scene, every moment she ignored her instincts, every time she forgave too quickly. Her suitcase sat by the door, but the real baggage, what she carried in her heart, was heavier. Darren stopped by with soup and a quiet presence. He didn't ask questions. He simply handed her a small notebook. Start writing, he said. Not for anyone else. Just for you. So you don't forget who you were before all this. Emily took it, clutching it like a lifeline. Somewhere deep inside her, a spark remained, small, flickering, but defiant. She had been cast aside, accused, discarded without truth. But the story wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. And this time, she wouldn't survive quietly. She would rise, not to be loved, but to never be broken again. Rachel had always been the calmer sister, the peacemaker in chaos, but watching Emily thrown out like trash by a man she once called her soulmate awakened something sharp, burning, and unstoppable. She refused to sit by and watch the woman who raised her, shielded her from their father's fists, and sacrificed everything for love be destroyed by lies. She turned her grief into strategy. With Darren and Greg's help, Rachel began collecting threads, every whisper, every suspicious transfer Vanessa made at River South, every inconsistency in her work history. Greg confirmed that Vanessa had no legitimate corporate background prior to rejoining the logistics firm and that several of her submitted references were unverifiable. Darren managed to clone Vanessa's business laptop by posing as a maintenance technician, pulling financial logs and emails that hinted at manipulation. What they found wasn't just sabotage, it was potential fraud, misuse of company funds, and falsification of internal reports. Vanessa wasn't just a liar. She was a predator. Meanwhile, Emily threw herself into quiet healing, finding unexpected purpose at a children's shelter where she'd volunteered years ago. Though she still bore bruises on her skin and in her soul, being around the laughter of forgotten children gave her a kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. One young girl named Tasha, with braids and bright eyes, clung to her constantly, reminding her of who she once was, someone hopeful. Emily baked again too, small batches of cinnamon muffins and apple tarts for the shelter staff. She didn't speak much about Nathaniel anymore. When people asked, she simply smiled and said, "I'm learning to love myself again." But deep down, she still woke up in the middle of the night, chest heavy with questions and the weight of false accusations. It wasn't vengeance she wanted, it was clarity, truth, closure. And though she didn't yet know it, Rachel was about to hand her all three wrapped in a package even karma would envy. The trap was simple: expose Vanessa using her own pride. Rachel reached out using a fake consulting company email, offering Vanessa an invitation to a fabricated luxury business brunch for women entrepreneurs. The event was a ruse, set up in a rented conference room filled with recording equipment. Vanessa, arrogant and eager to boost her public image, arrived in her usual polished perfection, unaware she was walking into her own unraveling. Greg, disguised as a moderator, asked calculated questions that led her to boast about making men dance, even bragging about manipulating Emily out of Nathaniel's life. "Some women cry to break down walls," she said smugly. "I cry to make people open doors." Everything was recorded, audio, video, time-stamped and traceable. Rachel left the room with the footage, heart pounding, hands shaking. "She has no idea what's coming," she said to Darren outside. The only question now was, would Nathaniel finally see the truth, or would karma have to hit him even harder? Vanessa now ruled Nathaniel's life, professionally, emotionally, and mentally. She moved into his apartment a week after Emily's exile, redecorating the space with modern furniture and cold colors that erased every trace of warmth Emily had left behind. Nathaniel, blinded by ambition and the comfort of control, allowed it all. His position at Riversouth expanded, thanks to Vanessa's charm with the board and the corporate alliances she forged, many of them under shady pretenses. She began hosting lavish networking dinners at high-end venues, using Nathaniel as her trophy partner to gain legitimacy. Internally, however, the team had begun to murmur. Reports weren't adding up. Funds went missing and reappeared in different departments. Nathaniel signed off on documents without reading them, trusting Vanessa completely. Greg tried to warn him, but his concerns were waved off as jealousy. "She's saving my career," Nathaniel said smugly. "Unlike Emily, she understands the pressure I'm under." But the pressure wasn't lifting, it was gathering like a dam ready to break. Greg met with Rachel and Darren at a private cafe to go over the company's quarterly reports, only this time, they weren't there as friends. They were investigators now. Darren pointed out inconsistencies in supplier invoices, double payments, forged email approvals, and ghost vendors, many linked to offshore accounts traced back to Vanessa's alias. "She's siphoning money," Greg confirmed, "and Nathaniel's name is on every authorization." Rachel's jaw clenched. "And he still thinks she's his savior." Emily didn't want to know the details at first. She wanted peace. But when Rachel finally showed her a transfer slip with Vanessa's signature under Nathaniel's letterhead, Emily quietly folded the paper and said, "He gave her everything he wouldn't give me: trust, loyalty, the benefit of doubt. Let him suffer what I did." But this wasn't just about karma anymore. It was about justice, for the bakery she nearly lost, the child she buried alone, and the home she was chased out of with lies wrapped in ribbons. Inside the executive offices of Riversouth, whispers turned into side eyes, and side eyes turned into boardroom tension. Levon had once admired Nathaniel's hunger, but lately, he noticed a man too distracted to lead, too reliant on Vanessa's smooth-talking presence. Employees began resigning. Key partners withdrew from contracts. Greg, having finally had enough, compiled all the evidence, financial records, video confessions, fake vendors, and submitted it anonymously to the board. It didn't take long. Within 72 hours, Vanessa was summoned for questioning, but she didn't appear. Her apartment was found empty. Her phone disconnected. Nathaniel, frantic, checked their joint accounts. Everything was gone. Savings, bonuses, even his pension deposits. All drained. When he called her one last time, it rang once, then played a voice recording. "Trust is a beautiful thing, Nathaniel. Pity you wasted it on the wrong woman." As he stood there in his hollowed-out apartment, surrounded by betrayal and silence, only one word echoed through his mind: Emily. The board meeting at Riversouth was supposed to be routine, but when the lights dimmed and the projector flickered on, everything changed. Greg stood before the board with a calm authority, flanked silently by Darren and Rachel at the back of the room. The footage played, Vanessa at the fake brunch event, laughing as she bragged about emotionally manipulating Nathaniel, forging vendor partnerships, and weaponizing pity. Her voice filled the conference room, casual and unrepentant. "A crying woman is more dangerous than a loaded gun if she knows how to aim it." Gasps filled the room. Levon turned pale. There were also screenshots of bank transfers from Nathaniel's account to shell companies registered under aliases Vanessa had used before. Contracts, messages, financial documents, all lined up with timestamps, presented in chronological order. Nathaniel sat frozen at the edge of the table, watching his world crumble as each truth piled upon another like stones at his own grave. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift and merciless. Riversouth's legal team launched a full internal audit, and Nathaniel was suspended pending investigation. Investors demanded explanations. Headlines across business blogs read, "Executive romance ends in financial fraud scandal." Greg refused to gloat. "I warned him," he muttered to Darren. "He let power and lust blind him." Rachel sat Emily down gently and showed her the press release and evidence packet. Emily read in silence, not with vengeance but a quiet ache. "So, this is what the truth looks like," she whispered. "Ugly, loud, and too late." But Rachel shook her head. "No, it's not too late. You're free now." For the first time in weeks, Emily exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The weight was finally shifting, not because Nathaniel fell, but because she no longer carried the blame for something she never did. Now, people saw clearly, and that clarity was worth more than any apology. Elsewhere, Nathaniel spiraled. With Vanessa gone, his assets drained, and his career teetering on collapse, he became a ghost of the man who once confidently ordered tailored suits and turned away the woman who built his peace. Alone in his apartment, surrounded by empty liquor bottles and eviction notices, he watched the video again. Vanessa's voice now sounded different, mocking, venomous. He remembered the night she faked the bakery assault, the way she clutched him like prey playing innocent. It all played back in his head like a cruel joke. Desperate, he tried to reach Emily, through calls, messages, even showing up once outside the bakery, only to see her walking hand in hand with a child from the shelter, smiling. She didn't see him. Or maybe she did, and chose not to care. And that was the final cut. Nathaniel sank to the floor and finally cried, not for Vanessa, not for the money, but for the woman who had loved him before the storm, and whom he had thrown away. The storm rolled in violently that evening, dark clouds twisting across the Atlanta skyline like punishment descending from above. Nathaniel sat behind the wheel of his black SUV, speeding down I-85 with his phone buzzing incessantly. An anonymous tip had pinged his inbox, revealing Vanessa's current location, a boutique airport on the outskirts of town. She was leaving, fleeing with the last of the stolen money. Rage pulsed through his veins like fire. How could he have been so blind? As thunder cracked overhead, he gripped the steering wheel tighter, pushing the gas harder, weaving between cars recklessly. He didn't call the police. He didn't think to. All he could see was Vanessa's smirk, her lies, and Emily's bloodied face the night she was thrown out. He needed answers. He needed revenge. He needed closure. But fate had its own plan. And it didn't involve Nathaniel arriving at that airport unscathed, or even arriving at all. Vanessa, meanwhile, moved through the airport lounge with false calm, her designer coat shielding bundles of stolen cash strapped beneath. She checked her watch and smirked. "He won't catch me," she whispered to herself. But outside, the rain pounded harder, and sirens blared in the distance. Nathaniel's car hydroplaned just as he swerved onto the off-ramp, spinning out of control. Time slowed as metal screeched against concrete. His SUV collided with a delivery truck at full speed, flipping twice before landing upside down in a ditch. Glass shattered, tires hissed, and screams echoed from bystanders. Vanessa, moments from boarding, glanced at the growing crowd outside the terminal and narrowed her eyes. She saw the wreckage. Then she saw the familiar plates. For a moment, just one, her smirk faltered. But rather than turn back, she turned away, boarding pass in hand, vanishing through the gate. Outside, Nathaniel bled and begged, his hand twitching toward a photo of Emily in his cracked wallet, the last face he wished he'd never forgotten. The crash was broadcast on local news within the hour. Rachel gasped when she saw the footage, nearly dropping her phone. Darren rushed to the hospital immediately, and by the time Nathaniel was wheeled into surgery, unconscious and broken, the doctors had little hope. Miraculously, he survived, but not without consequence. When he awoke days later, he couldn't move his legs. Spinal trauma. Paralysis. The man who once stood over Emily with a raised voice and arrogant pride now stared at ceiling tiles from a hospital bed, trapped inside his regrets. And Vanessa? Gone. No trail. No trace. No remorse. She had used him and discarded him like he did to Emily. Karma, wrapped in velvet gloves, had delivered its blow with devastating precision. Nathaniel asked for Emily only once. Rachel visited him instead, stood by the door, and said coldly, "She doesn't owe you anything. Rest in your consequences." Then she left. And Nathaniel finally realized, some wounds never get bandaged. 2 weeks after the accident, Nathaniel sat in a wheelchair by the wide glass window of St. Augustine Medical Center, staring out at the world that continued moving without him. The man who once wore ambition like a crown now wore hospital gowns in silence. His hands trembled as he held a letter Emily had once written him, folded and crinkled, stained with time and his own regret. With Rachel refusing to deliver another message, he finally convinced Darren to take him to Emily's bakery. The ride was long, and Nathaniel said little. When they arrived, the bell above the bakery door chimed gently. Emily, standing behind the counter with flour on her apron and peace in her posture, turned slowly. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't rush toward him. Instead, she simply watched. Nathaniel wheeled forward, lips trembling. "I was wrong. About everything." His voice cracked. "I lost myself. I lost you. I'm sorry, Emily. Please forgive me." Emily didn't flinch. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked around the counter, not with vengeance, but with poise forged in fire. She knelt, not for him, but so her eyes could meet his, and spoke quietly. "Forgiveness isn't a key that unlocks yesterday, Nathaniel. It's a door I choose to walk through alone." He looked at her, confused. "So, you don't hate me?" She smiled sadly. "I don't carry hate. I carry lessons. And you were one of them." The bakery behind her was full, customers laughing, children eating cookies, a woman at the counter holding a brochure for Emily's new baking course. Her life had moved on. "You threw me out believing a lie," she said. "You never asked me what happened. You never protected me. I needed a husband, not a judge." Nathaniel swallowed hard. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Emily's gaze softened, but her voice held firm. "The right thing never feels like betrayal." Darren eventually wheeled Nathaniel back to the car. He said nothing during the ride home. He didn't ask what Emily said, he didn't need to. Her silence had already echoed louder than any words. Nathaniel stared out the window, watching streetlights blur past like all the chances he'd wasted. He thought about Vanessa, her smile masking poison. He thought about Emily, her strength stitched from every wound he gave her. Most of all, he thought about the life they could have had, the child they'd lost, the home that was once filled with laughter and late-night pastries. Back in the hospital room, he sat alone in the dark, replaying the moment Emily said goodbye with grace instead of tears. It wasn't the accident that broke him. It wasn't even the paralysis. It was the fact that the one person who had every reason to destroy him chose instead to rise without him. And that, he realized, was the deepest consequence of all. Months passed like the slow turning of seasons. Emily had rebuilt not just her bakery, but her spirit. Bennett's Bliss expanded into a double storefront after a neighboring space went up for lease, and Rachel officially became her co-owner, managing operations while finishing her nursing degree. Emily no longer lived in Rachel's apartment. Instead, she moved into a small, sunlit townhouse with a backyard garden where she often baked with the children from the shelter. Her days were filled with the scent of butter, cinnamon, and calm. But it was her evenings that became something new. Darren began visiting more, first with small excuses, a flat tire near her shop, forgotten tools he accidentally left behind, or to fix a leaky faucet. Slowly, their conversations grew deeper. Darren had always been present, steady, loyal, kind, but now Emily was seeing him. Not as Rachel's friend. Not as Nathaniel's shadow. But as the man who never once let her fall. One Sunday evening, as the bakery closed early for inventory, Darren stayed to help. Music played softly in the background while the two of them reorganized storage shelves, laughing over expired cocoa powder and old recipe books. At one point, Emily dropped a box of baking molds, and as they knelt together to clean it up, their hands touched. Neither pulled away. Emily looked up into Darren's eyes, eyes that had never lied to her, eyes that had seen her broken and never flinched. "You waited," she whispered. He smiled gently. "I never left." That night, he walked her home, and before leaving, he paused at her doorstep. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "But if there's even a corner of your heart that has room for something new, I'd be honored to earn it." Emily didn't answer with words. She leaned forward and kissed him, not out of need, but out of choice. And in that quiet moment, something shifted inside her, a second chance she no longer feared. Rachel, watching from the window, smiled knowingly and stepped back, heart full. The family they had now wasn't conventional, but it was whole. Greg had recently proposed to Rachel in the most awkward, romantic way, kneeling with a donut ring box in the middle of the bakery floor, flour on his tie and icing on his cheek. She said yes without hesitation. Emily stood beside her sister in the mirror the next day, helping her zip into a dress for the bridal photo fitting. "We made it," Rachel whispered. Emily nodded. "We're still making it." Later, Emily found herself writing again in the journal Darren once gave her, this time not from pain, but from hope. She wrote about forgiveness, about strength, about the kind of love that didn't rush in but walked quietly beside you until you were ready. And as she closed the journal and looked out into the sunset spilling over her new garden, she finally understood. Healing didn't mean forgetting, it meant choosing peace over bitterness, again and again. The grand opening of Bennett and Sisters Catering House was nothing short of breathtaking. The once humble bakery had transformed into a bustling two-story space with a cafe, a culinary classroom, and a private event wing. People poured in from every corner of Atlanta, former clients, teachers, local business leaders, families from the shelter, and even strangers who had followed Emily's story through the quiet whispers of resilience. A local journalist covering small businesses asked her what the secret was behind her success. Emily, dressed in a soft emerald green dress with her curls pinned back, smiled and said, "Choosing peace, even when chaos felt louder." Rachel, now proudly engaged to Greg, handled the media while Darren stood in the corner speaking to a group of kids about mentorship. Emily watched it all unfold, not with the need to be praised, but with the gentle satisfaction of a life earned. The chapter of pain had closed. This chapter, was hers. Outside, under the wide-open sky, Emily walked into the courtyard where Darren stood alone, watching fireflies drift across the garden beds. She approached slowly, memories of everything they had survived quietly brushing against her chest like wind. "Funny," she said, "how life tears you apart just to show you what really matters." Darren turned, took her hand, and whispered, "And how love waits quietly until you're ready to see it." Their fingers intertwined. No grand declarations. No promises built on fantasy. Just two people choosing each other, freely, honestly, and without the ghosts of yesterday standing between them. That evening, as music filled the night air and guests danced beneath soft string lights, Emily shared a slow dance with Darren beneath the stars. Not once did she look around to see who was watching. Not once did she look back. Her healing was no longer a quiet thing hidden behind bakery counters. It was loud, full, and alive in every step she took forward. Across town, Nathaniel sat by the window of the rehabilitation center, watching the world move beyond the limits of his chair. He received an invitation to the grand opening. He never responded. In his lap was a photo of Emily, smiling, taken years ago during a picnic he never remembered appreciating. He had lost not because Emily sought revenge, but because he had underestimated the value of her quiet grace. Vanessa was never found. Some said she escaped to another country. Others believed she lived under a new name. Nathaniel didn't care anymore. His punishment wasn't prison or pain, it was knowing he had tasted heaven and spit it out for ashes. Meanwhile, Emily, Rachel, Darren, and Greg raised a toast that night under lanterns, to survival, to sisterhood, to unexpected turns. To beginnings, Emily said. And as laughter roared around her and love bloomed without fear, she knew, sometimes, the ending you never wanted leads you to the life you always deserved. The end. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like and comment, and also share to your loved ones or anyone who might be interested. Turn on post notification after subscribing, so you get informed on our next video. Thank you, and I'd see you next time. Bye for now.